if you have to rub out your opponents and if you have to exclude from the election that's coming up in about a month's time a candidate who at the best would have got 10% of the vote, that's not a sign of confidence. It's not a sign of strength. And basically what's happening is that Putin is using force and fear to try to control the Russian population. That's exactly what Soviet dictatorship did, and eventually it fell. I thought Yulia Navalny's video message was not only incredibly moving and dignified, but it also contained the really important statement that she will continue his work. The Navalny network was very professional, and what they did was to penetrate the regime's attempts to keep information out of Russia. I think it's really important that not only the Navalny network, but some of the 2 million or so Russians who've left Russia because they didn't want to live under Putin should support them and should continue to try to get word through to the Russian people of how much this war is costing them in terms of casualties and the huge direct costs of the war.
On the death of the Russian opposition leader and dissident Alexei Navalny, the Foreign Office Minister Leo Doherty has been addressing the House of Commons just in the last few minutes.
No one should doubt the dreadful nature of the Russian system. Years of mistreatment at the hands of the state had a serious effect on Mr. Navalny's health. His death must be investigated fully and transparently. The Russian authorities must urgently confirm the location of Mr. Navalny's body to his family and allow them access to it.
Leo Doherty, the Foreign Office Minister, is still addressing the Commons as I speak. And meanwhile, Navalny's widow, Yulia Navalny, has made a video vowing to continue his work. Here's a translation of some of what she had to say.
This man was killed by Vladimir Putin. 3 days ago, Vladimir Putin killed my husband, Alexei Navalny. Putin killed the father of my children. Putin took away the most precious thing that I had.
Now, the family is still being denied access to his body days after the death.
They are now hiding his body. They're not showing it, not giving it to his mother. They're pathetically lying and waiting for the traces of yet another of Putin's Novichoks to disappear there.
Now, European leaders are weighing their options on more sanctions against Russia and the Kremlin. Let's talk now to Sir Roderic Lyne, the former UK ambassador to Russia. Hello to you, Sir Roderic.
Good afternoon,
Hi.
John.
It's good to have you on the programme. And what are your thoughts at this stage, Sir Roderic? I mean, the death of Alexei Navalny, it is shocking in some way without being surprising. It drew attention to the abuses and oppression of the Putin regime. One can certainly say that.
It also draws attention to the weakness of the regime. If you have to rub out your opponents and if you have to exclude from the election that's coming up in about a month's time a candidate who at the best would have got 10% of the vote, that's not a sign of confidence. It's not a sign of strength. And basically what's happening is that Putin is using force and fear to try to control the Russian population. That's exactly what Soviet dictatorship did, and eventually it fell. I thought Yulia Navalny's video message was not only incredibly moving and dignified, but it also contained the really important statement that she will continue his work. The Navalny network was very professional, and what they did was to penetrate the regime's attempts to keep information out of Russia. I think it's really important that not only the Navalny network, but some of the 2 million or so Russians who've left Russia because they didn't want to live under Putin should support them and should continue to try to get word through to the Russian people of how much this war is costing them in terms of casualties and the huge direct costs of the war.
Now, we're seeing European leaders now talking together about further sanctions against Russia. Navalny himself had a list of those who he said deserved and needed to be sanctioned. What would you like to see done? It's not clear that the sanctions that we've seen have had much of an effect on the nature of the regime and the way that they act.
sanctions are slow acting. They are having an effect. There are specific industries, including the defense industry, that are having difficulty accessing Western equipment, replacement equipment for oil refineries that have been damaged by Ukrainian attacks and so on. But I think the really important area is the sanctions on Russian export of oil. The Russians are still managing to evade this quite effectively. They've built a fleet of shadow tankers, and I hope that that's something that the Europeans are looking at very closely and have at the top of their list, because it's the largest source of revenue for the Russian state.
Right, now seizing Russian assets in Western banks, that really would hurt, wouldn't it? There are hundreds of billions of dollars in various Western banks. I know there are reasons that some leaders around Europe hesitate about that sort of step, but David Cameron's been one who said let's grab those assets and use them to help with Ukraine's needs. What's your take?
I'm not sure it would hurt in real time. I think it would be largely symbolic. There's about $300 billion worth of Russian reserves that are frozen, $190 billion worth in Brussels in the Euroclear system. But this is already money that Russia has no access to and will not have access to, at least until the end of this war, and perhaps ever. So it wouldn't actually directly affect Russia here and now.
It would hurt the oligarchs, though, wouldn't it? And some of those, incredibly rich people around Putin whose support he wants and needs.
Well, there's different kinds of Russian oligarchs. There are many Russian oligarchs who actually don't support Putin. There's Putin's gang of cronies, but that's a different situation to the 300 billion of Russian frozen reserves that is being talked about. Most of the oligarchs, if not all of them, or most of the billionaires close to Putin, people like Kovalchuk and so on, are already under personal sanctions. So I'm not sure that is going to inflict more pressure on the regime. But I do think that if you attack the main source of export earnings of Russia, which is oil, because they've pretty well lost the European gas market forever, and that was a huge source of income,
yes,
that has a real effect.
Yes, I mean, there is a worry too, isn't there, that if national reserves around the West are seized, then that would lead to an exodus of national reserves from Western banks.
I think that's a very real concern as well. So why do something that is not actually going to have a short-term effect on Russia, but that could actually damage the stability of international finance? I think you've got to be very careful with that. There's one other thing that we desperately need to be doing in Europe, which is to increase our own defenses, to build up our own military, because we have been underspending. We're still underspending. We're only spending just over 2% of GDP in this country. At the end of the Cold War, we were spending 4.6% of GDP, twice what we're spending now. Of course, we don't want to have to spend more money. We've got our own economic problems. But this is critical for our future security, and we need to invest in it now.
Right. Before we part, I wonder what you make of the words, the social media posting of Donald Trump, who is a very serious contender to be the next president, as we know, of the United States. He has spoken out finally on the death of Navalny. He spoke about the sudden death of Navalny, echoing the language used by the Kremlin, who said that Alexei Navalny died of sudden death syndrome. And Donald Trump only did this in the context of painting himself as a victim of political oppression in America.
Yes, well, Donald Trump has a talent for making some of the most bizarre and illogical statements that any politician in history has ever made, and this is one of them. To equate what is being done to Donald Trump to what Putin's so-called justice system did to Navalny is really from a different planet.
Roderic, it's good to get your thoughts now. Let's talk again soon. So Roderic Lyne, former British ambassador to Russia.